Hello. Welcome to another episode of Laureate Conversation, your number one book podcast where we sit down with your favorite award-winning authors to discuss their journey and books. I am Miriam Obaijoko, and today I have an author whose work feels honest, reflective, and deeply personal in a way that stays with you long after you've read it. She is the author of This Thing in My Head, a non-fiction book that explores identity, culture, relationship, and the quiet internal conversations we all have but don't usually know how to express. Our work has been recognized as the best non-fiction book at the African Laureate Award 2026, and it's easy to see why. Joining me today is Jessica Aike. Jessica, welcome to the Laureate Conversation. It's really good to have you here, and congratulations on your award. So, Jessica, tell us a bit about yourself. Who is Jessica Aike?
Hello everyone, my name is Jessica Aike. I am a writer and the author of This Thing in My Head, and I am happy to be having this interview today.
Oh, thank you. We're also honored to have you here. And I have to say, the way you write feels very assured, very intentional. It's honestly read like someone who has been doing this for a long time. So I'm curious, how long have you been writing? And when did you realize this was something you were really good at?
So I often tell people that I came into the world with a book in one hand and a notebook and pen in the other. For as long as I can remember, I've always enjoyed reading and writing. It's always brought me immense joy. I started writing my own stuff pretty early on, definitely before the age of 9. So I have amassed quite a lot of writing experience. When it comes to when I became aware of my writing talent, I'd say that was a blend of different things. The more I wrote and liked what I was writing, the more I started to realize that I'm actually good at this. Then, of course, having access to good education and a brilliant English teacher that was very encouraging of my writing capabilities also played a part in my confidence. So I would say my early years of writing, liking what I wrote, paired with good education and encouragement, definitely goes a long way in framing the way you perceive yourself and navigate through the world.
I love how you mentioned having good access to education at a very young age. Speaking of young age, there's a particular part where you mentioned how you transformed from being a tomboy to embracing your femininity, which you sometimes still struggle with. And it makes me wonder how growing up was like for you and what led to writing This Thing in My Head.
So growing up, I was a tomboy to varying degrees. And by tomboy, I mean my attire, my hobbies, and having a certain nature to myself. I have been on a journey to self-mastery and self-actualization for a few years now. And I realized that the more I dug deep, the more I understood that sometimes the very thing we assume to be a part of us are bodies of trauma. Am I saying that my tomboyish nature was a complete facade? Certainly not. Do I still feel like a tomboy? Yes. At my core, I will always be one. I still have tomboyish pieces of clothing that I still wear. My hobbies and interests haven't changed. In saying that, however, I understand that the need to exaggerate elements of my tomboyish side came from the need to protect myself from receiving attention from men, from women seeing me as competition, from people as a whole. It all boiled down to protection. It was important for me to include that part of myself in my book, This Thing in My Head, because oftentimes self-help books dismiss nuance. Nuance is rarely ever part of the equation. Self-help books often speaks in absolutes, forgetting the humanity, the story of a person. It was important for me to include that you can have organic traits that are a part of you, that you're comfortable with, and still admit that said traits have been exaggerated. I am still tomboyish Jessica, who loved going to the nail salon to get her nails done. I still have my attire, my hobbies, but that hardened exterior that I often had to retreat to is no longer a frequent part of my life, and I'm happy about that. I no longer feel embarrassed for wanting to look good and to feel good. I now embrace my own womanhood journey.
Interesting. I agree with everything you just said, absolutely. Especially the part where sometimes being a tomboy as a girl means it's more about protection, protecting yourself from unnecessary attraction or something. So yeah, and I also love how you mentioned nuances that self-help books don't usually talk about. I like that. So let's get to the title and the core idea. Because this thing in my head is a title that feels intentionally vague, almost like something you cannot fully name. So, my question to you is that what is this thing to you? Especially now, you're done with the book, you're getting your recognition. What does it mean to you?
Of all the titles that I've come up with when naming my pieces of work, this thing in my head is probably my favorite title by far. By far. I say this because it really does capture the essence of the book. The thing in this thing in my head encapsulates the vastness, the multitude of thoughts that run through not only my mind, but the mind of others. I also appreciate the air of mystery, of ambiguity that the title provides. This thing in my head is like my stream of thoughts. It represents some of my various thoughts that I've had throughout the years. Now that I've written the book, I'd say it still holds the same meaning. Because I thought that when I finished writing the book, that I'd have a difference of opinion in terms of the meaning of the title. But now that I've read it a few times, I'd say that it still holds meaning, just a blend of all of my thoughts. I would like to believe that for the most part, most people have a thing in their head. But I believe that people who have experienced and lived through hardship and pain have had the opportunity, not by choice, to think more, to reflect more, to flesh out their thoughts, their opinions through experiences. So, yes, I'd say that most people have a thing in their head, but that thing usually only ever gets stretched, pulled at, fleshed out through certain experiences that you go through in life that kind of force you to think.
That's very true because, like people say, experience is the best teacher. So, I think I understand where you're coming from. But I would like to go straight to the book because there's a lot to talk about. Starting from the beginning, the culture section, that opening paragraph, it's simple, but it carries weight, especially the idea of being seen and not heard, and how culture can shape identity before we even get a chance to define ourselves. When you're writing that, what was your experience like? Is it from a personal experience? Are you coming from a personal experience or from just observing the world around you?
My opening chapter on culture was a blend of my observations of the world with a few personal experiences. Growing up as a child, I observed a lot of behaviors within the Nigerian community that I found to be quite alarming. And it wasn't as if it was a one-off. It was constant. It kept on happening. It was in those moments that I realized that I wasn't the only one on the receiving end of said behaviors. It was also happening to other young people within the Nigerian community. The disregard of the very children Nigerian culture begs you to have is not only deeply entrenched within the Nigerian culture, it's also a pretty common theme globally. Society uses children as trophies to showcase fertility and legacy, while simultaneously holding disdain towards children. I believe it's insidious. Insidious, it's nasty. It's nasty. And it was important that that was the first thing I highlighted as somebody who is extremely protective of children.
You saying this really makes sense to me because I found it interesting that you chose to begin with culture. Because most nonfiction books start with the individual, the self, but you started with something bigger, almost like you're saying, before we understand ourselves, something else has already shaped us. Why was it important for you to start there?
There are elements of the self-help world that I agree with. I agree with the notion that as adults, we should strive to practice personal responsibility, that we should utilize our agency, our autonomy. However, as an avid fiction reader and a fiction writer, I understand that the self-help book's rhetoric is only half of the narrative. Very rarely are things black and white. It was important that I addressed the elephant in the room, the root of the issue, which is culture. The problem is culture. It's culture. A country, a nation, is as good as the people in it. And if we want better outcomes, we must look at the culture. Now, am I saying that we should resign ourselves to fate and never do anything because of culture? No, of course not. There are outliers, people who have gone against the grain, even with the pushback they received, to better themselves and the lives of the people who are coming after them. But the exception does not make the rule. And to expect groundbreaking change of behaviors from people without adjusting, changing the very culture that's causing all of these problems is a fool's errand. For the most part, people want acceptance, especially from those who look just like them. And I've learned that people want acceptance, especially from those who look just like them. So, if the price of a person taking the steps to improve themselves without the actual culture doing the same means isolation, ostracization, most people will not take those steps. Once again, if the price of a person taking the steps to improve themselves without the actual culture doing the same thing means isolation, ostracization, most people will not take those steps. They won't. And we have to be cognizant of that. We have to be.
That's interesting. I love the parts where you said, for the most part, people want acceptance, especially for those who look just like them. And it got me thinking, do you think culture shapes identity, or does it sometimes restrict it?
I definitely believe that culture shapes identity, it restricts identity, it thrusts identities onto people without actually caring about the thoughts, opinions, feelings of the people they are thrusting culture on. Culture does it all. Culture? Nigerian culture is a culture that prides itself in being communal. And when I say communal, I have air quotes around that word. Nigerians believe they are communal by nature. And although there is some truth there, I personally believe that the reasons why Nigerians cling so tightly to being communal is due to poverty. Yes, poverty. When you have no resources, capital, currency to aid you, shield you, protect you as you navigate the world, you have no choice but to cling to family, friends, those within your proximity. But anyways, my views on Nigerian culture prioritizing being communal because of poverty is a story for another day. Back to the crux of the matter. Because Nigerian culture is very particular on family, friends, people being tightly woven, it creates an environment where people often feel that they have to abide by strict guidelines and behavioral norms. And in the event that you dare to step out of that, you risk being ostracized. And like I said earlier on, although it's fun and freeing to chant, live your life for you, do you, boo? At the end of the day, people want to fit in. People want to be accepted, liked, loved, welcomed by people, especially people that look just like them. So I'm not necessarily judging the conformity. I'm simply saying that a culture that is that restrictive shouldn't be surprised when the majority of the people within the culture are stunted. I can understand wanting to operate as a unit with shared beliefs and views, but there should be leeway for difference. People should be allowed to decide if they align, and if they don't align, people should still be able to have relationships with those that they love.
I love what you said. People should still be able to have relationship with people they love. And that's like regardless of their culture, their practice, or their belief, or whatever they're going through. Because that is one of the major problems we're having in this country. Intolerance, not understanding people enough to accept them for who they are. I think that's very interesting because I also noticed that there's a tension you highlight between generation. The idea that the younger voices are often dismissed until they're suddenly needed. Do you think this dynamic is changing, or is it still very much part of how we grew up?
So, writing about the relationship between the older and younger generation was one of my favorite topics to write about because it holds so much weight. Nigerian culture generally doesn't respect young people, which is quite interesting because Nigeria as a country is made up of mostly young people. So you would assume that the Nigerian culture would place importance on them and come up with ways to ensure the betterment of their lives, but that's not the case. It's not the case. This mindset that good things can only come from older people is dangerous because it paints older people as a demographic who can never do any wrong, which is harmful. Because let's say an older person does something wrong to a younger person, because of the pedestalization of the older person, that younger person's cry for help will be silenced and dismissed. Assuming that older people are the only ones who could do good is also demeaning, because it leaves youngsters feeling slighted and feeling like, so what's the point? What's the point of me trying to be better if my culture, my country doesn't even place value on me? What's the point? Now, I will say that there are a few older people who have been open to giving youngsters a listening ear instead of being dismissive. I'm aware that there are older people who out there who make it their mission to encourage and promote young talent, provide opportunities, resources for them to better themselves. But for the most part, there is still that condescending air that hovers around older people when they speak of and interact with younger people. The culture of, who are you? Why are you talking? As a means to devalue the young person. The culture of being seen and not heard. The culture of disrespect towards youngsters is so deeply entrenched in Nigerian culture, it will take a very, very long time before the necessary changes occur. I see young people pushing back and trying to establish a sense of respect for themselves, but it takes two to tango. And if one of the duo is heavily resistant, it will be very difficult.
That's very, very true. Most cultures in the Nigerian society do not really value children's opinion, especially in families where sometimes even a child wants to make a contribution, they just be like, shut up, who are you to talk? Elderly people are talking, you don't have a say. It's very, very interesting. But let's go to self-esteem and people pleasing, because that's one of my favorite chapters. I found myself reading and rereading some lines like a mantra. In the section on self-esteem and people pleasing, there's a quiet tension between wanting to be accepted and wanting to be authentic. Do you think people pleasing is rooted more in fear or in love?
People pleasing is definitely rooted in fear. People like to attach their behavior to feelings and emotions associated with pleasant things like love as a cop out. They do it because they are scared to admit that they people please, because they are afraid of people's reactions and opinions towards them. Most people see fear as some sort of moral failing, which it can be in some specific situations, but for the most part, it's a feeling that shouldn't necessarily be shunned. But yes, people pleasing is definitely rooted in fear. The fear of being perceived to be a bad person and the stigma that comes with. And like I said before, people want to be accepted. And if that acceptance means losing out on their own pockets of happiness, joy, peace, most people will trade that in for acceptance. I think this also begs the question of if society plays a major role in people feeling like they have to people please for survival. Like, how do we treat people who respectfully set reasonable boundaries with us? The operating word to being respectful and reasonable, because as much as I believe in creating a quality life for yourself, it's also important to note that we are not the only ones existing in this world. There are other people who also have their own dream lives and wants and needs. So yes to boundaries, yes to having a fulfilling life, but also yes to give and take, yes to being reasonable. But back to the point of how society plays a role in people feeling that they have no choice but to people please. I believe that there should be more conversations and acceptance of the duality of a person. I think that oftentimes society strips people down to absolutes, never allowing for flaws and human error. I'd like to think that if we strive to stop leading with our egos, which tends to leave us feeling slighted, we could see the humanity in a person. Learn not to take their boundaries so personally, which in turn may reduce the need for people to perform. That's what I think anyway, but hey, I may be wrong, who knows?
Oh, you're absolutely right. I love how you mention how the society plays a role in people pleasing because people have no choice than to people please. We don't really give people the benefit of that, the ability to understand that these people are flawed and they tend to make mistakes. And I think that's one of the major problems also having as a society in the entire world, globally, really. It's not even just a Nigerian or African thing. Everybody just wants someone who can be a people pleaser, really, even in at work, corporate firms, it's everywhere. But I would like to know, at what point did you personally realize that being liked and being understood are not the same thing?
When you get serious about your personal development, leveling up, self-actualization journey, whatever you want to call it, and not in the performative way, I mean actually doing the internal work, you will realize that for the most part, people like the idea of you, not who you really are. They like it when you are a yes man, agreeable, surface level. But when you actually show up in your entirety with boundaries, a genuine likeness of self, an understanding of your own flaws and hypocrisies, it irritates people. It irritates people because, for the most part, most people live in a never-ending state of performance. So in their minds, they're thinking, who do you think you are to be so upfront and accepting of who you are? With authenticity comes healthy boundaries. And as we know, people don't like boundaries. They don't. Most people suffer from feeling entitled to absolutely everybody. So by the time you finish unearthing people's nature and how they really feel about themselves and you understand that, yes, being liked feels good. And it's important that I emphasize that because oftentimes people like to make people feel bad for liking certain things. Like, oh, stop seeking validation. Seeking validation is a normal thing. It's not a bad thing. It's about balance. So yes, being liked feels good. It is a nice stroke to the ego, but it's fleeting. It's not rooted or formidable. It's here and it's there. But being understood, however, comes with an acceptance of your nature. It comes with an acceptance of your nature. I accept your nature, your hypocrisies, your flaws and all. So we should have personality and character traits that allow us to form connections with others. Likability is not a bad thing. Likability is not a bad thing. Likability is not a bad thing. But when it comes to being understood, when somebody truly understands you, that works out in your interest long term. Likability is a nice feeling, but it can be fleeting. Being understood is rooted. It's secure. It's accepting. It doesn't shift. So they're very different things. They're very different things.
That's interesting. Being understood works out in your interest long term. I love that. There's a part where you mentioned how we live in a part of the society that encourages being a doormat to please people or to make you seem humble to people. I would like you to shed more light on that.
Society as a whole is quite keen on humility, but Nigerian culture in particular, my goodness, is obsessed with other people performing humility, making themselves small. Now, I do believe in having a humble heart. I believe in being able to recognize your talents and gifts while still understanding that you are not above making a mistake, that you are not above reproach. That is what I call having a humble heart. The type of humility Nigerian society is after, however, is the type that demeans oneself to serve the self-esteem of others. I do not believe in that kind of humility. We should look at people's heart placement, not their performance of humility. Innocent random people do not have to serve themselves discomfort because you do not like yourself. They do not owe you that. I often think about the numerous talented, gifted people, young people, who have stopped themselves from pursuing their goals and dreams, not because of a lack of confidence, but because they fear how others would perceive them if they stepped into their power. They do not want to unintentionally trigger other people's insecurities, so they hold back. The fact that there are people, young people out there that do this upsets me. It really does. So I believe that Nigerian culture has to take a closer look at what they define as humility. People shouldn't feel like they have to hide and dodge because of other people's feelings of inadequacy. You have to learn to deal with that on your own. That's a you issue. That is a you issue.
Very, very true. I think it still boils down to what we talk about when we're talking about society trying to humble younger people, because most people that get affected by this humility are usually younger people, where society see you as, when you achieve some certain things and they just don't want you to talk about it because they feel like, oh, you're not being humble. It's just more of like a way to just lessen your ego. It's ridiculous, but unfortunately, that's the society we find ourselves. But I hope we do better, and thank you for sharing this. So let's talk about emotional and romance pattern. Your reflection on romance don't feel idealistic. In fact, they feel observational. Do you think we choose people consciously, or are we repeating patterns we don't fully understand?
So when I was writing my romance chapter, it was important to me that I didn't come across like I was giving out steps. I definitely wanted to come from a place of observation. And from my observations, I believe that for the most part, people who haven't evolved tend to operate from a place of repeating patterns. That's why people often reiterate the popular saying that says, the devil you know is better than the angel you don't know. It's a comforting saying that doesn't always hold weight. It just reinforces the notion that staying put and not going out there and figuring, exploring new things and people is the best way to do life, which ultimately just leaves people stagnant, repeating harmful patterns. I believe that the only people who truly, consciously choose their partners are people who have done the inner work to evolve. They say that madness is doing the exact same thing and expecting different results. And I believe that's true.
Yes, I love how you mentioned how you have to work on yourself internally to understand how to choose the right partner or when to choose the right partner so as to avoid repeating patterns. That is very important. So my question to you is that what did writing about love teach you about yourself that you did not realize before?
I wouldn't necessarily say that writing about love taught me anything new about myself. I'd say that reading this thing in my head after it was published just placed emphasis on my pre-existing views. If anything, it was a reminder about the importance of having a solid sense of self, a genuine likeness of self, and the importance of giving ourselves grace, our past selves, our present selves, and our future selves.
Yes, it is very, very important to give ourselves grace and forgive our past, present, and future selves. And it brings me down to the part where you discuss about mental space and internal dialogue. There's a strong sense that a lot of the conflicts in this book happens internally. Would you say your biggest battles are being with situations or with your own thoughts about them?
In one of the interviews I did in January 2025, I mentioned that one of the issues we have in the world isn't just the horrible things that happen to us, but the ways in which the community we come from and society at large responds to it and us. It is the way that the outside world responds to us in our vulnerable moments that either aids us in having a healthy internal dialogue or completely destroys whatever semblance is left of our worldview and the ways in which we perceive ourselves. For example, if a child speaks up about the abuse they have just experienced, if the child is old enough, they probably have already started developing their internal dialogue about what has happened and how they feel. Or if it's a much younger child, they may not know exactly what's gone on, but they may have negative changes in their behaviors. Now, we can't go back and undo the horror that has been done. However, the ways in which the community, society responds will have a huge impact on how that child navigates their journey to working through their trauma. The community, society can influence the child's internal dialogue and understanding of the matter positively. I know that for me, when I think back to my younger years, had I had a community who prioritized the well-being of children, I would have had a much healthier internal dialogue with myself. I would have managed my emotions better, and I would have been able to adjust to the world around me as I navigated my childhood and my teens. Have I been able to course correct in a way that's allowed me to enjoy my 20s? Yes. However, just because we have one success story doesn't mean that as a culture we can't do better. So yes, as a child, as a youngster, you have your own internal dialogue that you feed yourself. But it's in the moments of vulnerability, of pain, of trauma, that the outside world, our culture, our community, society can greatly influence the ways in which you perceive yourself and how you navigate through the world. So I'd say it's a mixture of both.
Yeah, it's true. The community, the society can influence the child's internal dialogue and understanding of any matter. That's why we need to do better as a society, as family, because whatever the child has gone through is that what will determine how their adulthood is like. So, but how do you know when your thoughts are telling you the truth and when they are misleading you?
One of the ways a person can recognize when their thoughts are telling them the truth versus when their thoughts are misleading them honestly boils down to trial and error. It comes from a commitment to learning self, which is a theme that I explore in my book, This Thing in My Head, because of how critical it is for one to know themselves. I truly believe that when you take the time to learn you, give you a chance, be rooted, solid, accepting of you, accepting of you, accepting of you, you'll slowly but surely have an understanding of who you are, and in turn learn to trust yourself. So you will be able to feel, recognize when, okay, that's a bit too much, read it back in, or actually no, I trust myself. So I'd say it's trial and error, and that comes from taking time out to learn yourself and to study yourself.
I really do believe that too. Now let's talk about the book Stone. It's not a typical self-help book. The book doesn't try to fix the reader. It does not give you that step-by-step solution on how to fix your life, whatever. You know, was it important for you to resist becoming another self-help voice?
So although fiction is my first love, I still agree with elements of the self-help world. I understand and appreciate the directness, the importance of personal responsibility, of not going through the world as a victim. I get that. However, as an avid fiction reader and as a fiction writer, it was important for me to find a middle ground. Yes, to not going through the world constantly clinging to victimhood, but no to completely removing nuance from the equation. Yes to shades of grey. I look at my life and what I've done so far, and I know that it's been a blend of the personal responsibility and no victimhood of the self-help world and the nuance, empathy, and humanity of fiction. I'd like to think that I've done a decent job of intertwining the two worlds in my book, This Thing in My Head.
Oh, you did not do a decent job. You did an amazing job. Decent is an understatement. Don't be humble. Another thing that stood out to me is just writing style. It's concise, almost like you're capturing thoughts as they come without over explaining them. And it makes me, make the book very, very real. Was it like a conscious decision to keep it short and allow the reader to sit with the thoughts, or
It was important to me that readers were picking up what I was putting down. It was important to me that they could feel my honesty, that they could tell that I meant what I was writing, that I didn't write the book for decoration. My words are actually genuine. I want the reader to sit with what I'm saying and identify what parts made them feel something and why. That thing you just read and it made you feel something, why? Why did you feel that kind of way? They say that you can take a horse to a river, but you cannot force it to drink the water. Throughout the entirety of my writing journey, I've shared my thoughts, my views, and I've always allowed the reader, the audience, to tailor my messages to their own lives, to give them the floor to take what they need and to feel things. If you're feeling something, why? So, yes, it was important for me that I allowed my readers to come to their own conclusions as well. I feel like sometimes the answers we need are within us. It just takes a bit of poking and prodding.
Oh, we sat with it. We had to. We were left with no choice but to think about it deeply. Well done. And I'm curious about this as well. Do you think the decision to keep the book short connects to how people engage with content lately? That maybe readers don't always want long instructional self-help book, but something more direct, more honest? Or was it simply about staying true to your voice?
When I was writing this thing in my head, it was important to me that my book was direct, honest, and stayed true to my voice. What's the essence of putting out a non-fiction book if it holds not even one truth? So yes, my book being shorter in comparison to others wasn't deliberate. It was about staying true to my voice. And if what I had to say took up less pages, then so be it.
That's interesting. Speaking about staying true to your voice, there's a level of honesty and vulnerability in this book that almost feel uncomfortable at times. Did you ever hold anything back while writing?
I definitely held back on sharing, talking about certain things in my book. For example, I held back on sharing certain personal details about my personal life as I believed that that would become the focal point of my book and not the actual range of thoughts and views that I shared throughout my book. I didn't want my personal life to take away from the book. I didn't want people to become so enamored with personal information that I shared on a particular page that it turns into a means of gossip instead of being seen as a means to learn from me and to better oneself. I have been online for over 10 years and I have had interactions with people from all walks of life. Some of those people have been very open and trustworthy with me. I do not take their trust or anyone's trust for granted. It is a beautiful thing to have people trust you with their inner world. In saying that, however, I have learnt not to project my character and beliefs onto other people. Just because I value trust does not mean I will be afforded, the same level of integrity. I also wanted to share more personal examples in my envy chapter, but I once again did not want to come off as conceited. So I opted for making the chapter more generalized. Experience has taught me that sometimes, no matter the innocence behind the intention, people will only ever see the outcome.
Yes, that is true. That is indeed true. But were there any parts of this book that felt risky to write because they were too close to home?
I mean, the title, This Thing in My Head, pretty much sums up that these are my own personal thoughts, so it doesn't really get closer to home than that. But to answer the question, are there any chapters in my book that I may have related to more than others? Yes. My chapter on culture and blackness were definitely chapters that I had first-hand experiences with. My chapter on blackness, for example, might have rubbed people the wrong way as it explores the issue of race and the ways in which people perceive you and interpret your behavior based on your race. Race is a sensitive topic for most, so I can understand the apprehension, but that didn't really hold me back with that chapter because I believe it is a very important issue that is plaguing black culture. It may make others queasy, but I'm still going to talk about it. Black people are not a monolith. Black people are not a monolith. Black people are not a monolith. A person's blackness is primarily based on their hue. Now, are there other factors that contribute to a person's black identity? Of course. But oftentimes, black people believe that they have the right to revoke a person's black card just because they are different from them. And by different, I'm not talking about opinions, beliefs, and behaviors that scream a deep hatred for self. I'm talking about different lifestyle choices, hobbies, interests, thoughts. So, some people may have been offended by that chapter, but that was not going to stop me from speaking up.
This the most important thing as a writer is to just tell your story, regardless of who it may be about. Of course, you have to be sensitive enough to understand where people are coming from, but when it comes to certain topics, you just have to say it as it is, you know, especially when it comes to Black people. Well done on that. But what was the hardest truth for you to write down?
So I wouldn't consider this the hardest truth I had to write down for myself, but I know that the hardest truth I had to write down for the readers to receive was that your insecurities, low self-esteem, feelings of inadequacy are your own personal business, and the innocent strangers navigating the world do not owe you their discomfort because you don't like yourself. I believe that would be quite difficult for some people to swallow. When it comes to me, I've never really been in the ministry of punishing other people for my own shortcomings. That's not really something that I deal with or I do. What I will say is that a harsh truth, a harsh reality that I had to stomach is that the world will not always give me empathy, sympathy, just because I've had a difficult life. One more time. The world will not always give me empathy and sympathy just because I've had a difficult life. That harsh truth and reality has really helped me in not going through the world clinging to victimhood. It's helped me to manage the need to overshare. In the past, I would overshare as a means to be relatable to other people. I was afraid of people looking at me as superior or thinking that I was better because I'm naturally quite a quiet person. So I would overshare as a means to connect and looking for of extra empathy. And I've learned that just because I've had a difficult life, the world will not always serve me empathy. And it's difficult to say that out loud and to admit, but it's the truth. And it's helped me in curtailing certain behaviors and becoming better. So yes, I'd say the harshest truth for the readers was probably that their insecurities, their self-esteem, their low self-esteem, and their feelings of inadequacy are their own personal business. And for me, it was recognizing that just because I've had a difficult life doesn't mean the world owes me sympathy and empathy. I might not always get that. I might not. And if I get it, great. But if I don't, I might not always get it. So yes.
I think I really, really like what you just mentioned about how whatever you're going through, it's your own personal business. And innocent traders do not really owe you that discomfort just to please you or just to make you feel better. It's really not necessary. Well done for touching that area. How do you feel about your book winning the Best Nonfiction Award at the African Laureate Award 2026? And how has your relationship with the book changed?
Mate, winning. I mean, who doesn't love winning? When I put out this thing in my head, my main goal was to get as much readership as possible. It's always been about getting my message out there and having readership. It's always been about readership. So you can imagine the joy I experienced when I got nominated and went on to win. When I got the email, I literally burst into tears. It took me back to the start of my writing journey. My journey has been filled with ups and downs, with tears, successes and failures. Over the past couple of years, I've buckled down and I started to take my craft and myself quite seriously, and I've seen the results. So winning has been a beautiful feeling. It's given me confidence in my abilities, and it's been a reminder that, Jessica, you are capable. Because I feel like sometimes we kind of have an idea of what we want, but we don't know that we limit ourselves. And so when something like this happens, you're like, oh my goodness, this is brilliant. This is lovely. So yeah, it's been a beautiful experience. I'd like to say a huge thank you to the African Laureate Awards for this recognition. It is deeply appreciated. It really is.
I must say it's a well-deserved award. You did so well. And this has been a thoughtful and honest conversation. Thank you for sharing your mind, your experiences, and your words with us. And once again, congratulations on your award. To everyone listening, this has been the Laureate Conversation. I am Miriam Obaijeko. Until next time, keep listening, keep reflecting, and keep asking yourself the questions that matters. It's a pleasure to speak with you today, Jessica. I hope to see you once again. See you. Bye.
And on that note, it's been a pleasure to speak to you today. I hope I've done a solid job of answering any pressing questions about my book. And thank you once again for the recognition. Much appreciated. You take care now. Bye.